the young and the restless spoilers. When word spread that Summer and young Harrison had arrived in Nice, it was more than a family visit. To those who knew the tangled web of Newman, Abbott, and their extended rivals, it was a declaration of intent. Summer's presence carried weight, for even if her marriage to Kyle had ended and she no longer had a claim to his heart, she was still the mother figure Harrison adored and a woman who had once believed she and Kyle were destined. Her sudden arrival in the very city where Kyle and Claire were preparing for their Persian wedding was a disruption that could not be ignored. Many dismissed it as coincidence or perhaps even a gesture of goodwill. But beneath the surface, Summer's motivations were sharper, fueled by emotions she could not contain. Whether she admitted it or not, she had unfinished business with Claire, and the wedding announcement had cut her deeper than she dared confess. Summer's rationale was simple enough on the surface. She was Harrison's protector. She insisted that the boy's safety was paramount, and she feared that Claire, with her history of instability and the shadows of Jordan's manipulations still clinging to her, was not fit to become his stepmother. It was a convincing story to outsiders, one that cast Summer as a cautious mother and not as a bitter ex-wife. But the truth was messier. Deep down, she still loved Kyle, or at least the version of him she had once known. Boyish charm, the family loyalty, the way he had once seen her as his entire future. Watching him now, devoted to another woman, preparing to pledge his life to Claire, it was unbearable. Her protests were less about Harrison's safety and more about her heart refusing to let go. The confrontation was inevitable. Summer found Claire one evening at a bar along the Riviera, celebrating her engagement with an unguarded joy that only intensified the jealousy burning inside her rival. Claire, radiant and giddy from the proposal, carried herself with the confidence of someone who finally believed she had outrun her past. Summer saw this and couldn't stomach it. The first words exchanged were barbed, veiled in polite tones, but dripping with venom. Summer accused Claire of being reckless, unworthy, unstable. Claire countered with sharp precision, mocking Summer's inability to let go of a man who had chosen someone else. The tension snapped like glass under pressure. The bar became a battlefield. What Summer had not anticipated was just how different Claire was now. Jordan's training, as twisted and dark as it had been, had left Claire with reflexes and strength that no ordinary woman could match. She moved like someone who had been shaped for survival, her instincts honed not by chance, but by years of manipulation and drills meant to turn her into a weapon. Summer threw the first shove, her anger spilling over, but Claire absorbed it effortlessly. Within seconds, the confrontation escalated into a brutal fight. Tables toppled, glass shattered, patrons screamed and scrambled to escape. Summer, though fierce in her passion, was no match for the precision and raw force Claire unleashed. The final blow was devastating. Claire struck Summer across the head, the impact sending her crashing to the floor. Blood streaked her temple, and her body went limp. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire stood over her, trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline and the sickening realization of what she had done. For a fleeting moment, she saw herself through Jordan's ice net as a woman in love, not as a bride-to-be, but as the killer she had been groomed to become. Panic clawed at her chest. She hadn't meant to take it this far. She wanted Kyle. She wanted love. She wanted redemption. But violence had always been stitched into her veins, and now it had spilled out in full view. Nearby, Harrison's cries pierced the chaos. The boy had witnessed more than he ever should have. He had seen Summer, the woman who raised him, struck down. He had seen Claire, the woman who claimed to love his father, standing over her fallen body like a predator over prey. Tears streamed down his face as he screamed, his small voice carrying desperation that froze Claire in place. For the first time since the fight began, she felt shame. She turned and fled the scene, disappearing into the night before anyone else could arrive, her heart pounding with guilt and confusion. Harrison's sobs didn't stop. Shaking, barely able to form words, he fumbled for the phone he had been taught to use in emergencies. His little fingers trembled as he dialed the only number he knew could save them, his father's. Kyle answered quickly, his voice laced with concern that turned into horror as Harrison cried into the receiver, "Daddy, help! Mommy's hurt Claire, Claire hurt her." The boy's words were fragmented, but the meaning was clear enough to shatter Kyle's world. When Kyle rushed to the bar minutes later, the scene was chaos. Summer lay unconscious, medics already working frantically to stabilize her. Patrons whispered, staff pointed, and all eyes turned toward him. The love of his life and the mother of his child had just collided in a way that could never be undone. Claire was gone, leaving behind only the wreckage of her actions and the growing suspicion that perhaps she was still the dangerous woman her past suggested. Kyle's mind spun as he tried to comfort Harrison, who clung to him with wide, tear-filled eyes, repeating the same words over and over, "She hurt Mommy. She hurt Mommy." The fallout was immediate and explosive. Summer's hospitalization drew the full force of both the Abbott and Newman families into Nice. Nick and Phyllis demanded answers, their anger scorching every corner of the room. Jack stood torn, caught between protecting his son and acknowledging the damage Claire had done. Victor, always pragmatic, saw the fight as a warning sign that Claire could not be trusted to marry into his empire. And Audra, lurking in the shadows of it all, seized the opportunity to push her narrative that Claire was unstable, dangerous, and incapable of being Kyle's future. But Kyle himself was conflicted in ways no one else could understand. He had seen Claire at her most vulnerable, had believed in her transformation, had asked her to be his wife. Yet now, the woman he loved had nearly killed Summer in front of his child. Was it a moment of weakness, an accident fueled by provocation, or was it proof that the training Jordan had drilled into her could never truly be erased? Kyle's heart told him one thing, but the evidence before his eyes told him another. And in the middle of it all was Harrison, traumatized, his innocence stolen by the sight of two women he cared for turning into enemies before his eyes. As Summer lay in a hospital bed, unconscious but alive, whispers began to spread. Was this the end of Kyle and Claire's whirlwind romance? Could a wedding still go forward with blood on her hands? Or had this fight in a bar in Nice lit the match that would ignite a much larger war not just between Claire and Summer, but between all the families circling them like vultures, waiting to claim victory in a battle that had only just begun? Because Claire had fled, but she hadn't disappeared. Somewhere in the night, guilt battled with fear. Love clashed with the instincts Jordan had carved into her, and she faced a truth she could no longer deny. No matter how much she wanted to escape her past, violence would always find her. And now, she had left behind the one thing she never wanted to lose: Kyle's trust. When the call came through, Kyle had been moments away from finalizing wedding details, his thoughts still wrapped around the future he was building with Claire. The sound of Harrison's trembling voice on the other end of the line shattered that illusion in an instant. His son's sobs were raw, frantic, desperate in a way Kyle had never heard before, and the words that poured out of the boy's mouth were like knives twisting into his chest. "Daddy, Mommy's hurt Claire, Claire hurt her." At first, Kyle couldn't even process the sentence. The logic of it resisted entry into his mind. Claire, his fiancée, the woman who had given him hope after heartbreak, was being named as the attacker of Summer, the woman he had once promised forever to, and the mother figure his son still clung to. It was impossible. It was horrifying. It was real. Kyle felt the blood drain from his face as adrenaline took over. He didn't ask questions, didn't argue, didn't stop to rationalize. He simply ran, every nerve in his body screaming at him to get to Harrison and to Summer before the world crumbled completely. When he arrived at the bar, the scene was chaos. Glass littered the floor, chairs overturned, voices raised in panic as patrons described what they had seen. The smell of blood hung in the air, metallic and nauseating. At the center of it all was Summer, sprawled on the ground, her hair matted with crimson, her skin pale, her body frighteningly still as medics worked feverishly to stabilize her. Harrison clung to the paramedic's arm, his cheek streaked with tears, his wide eyes searching for his father. When Kyle scooped him into his arms, the boy buried his face into his chest and cried harder, repeating the accusation again and again, as if saying it out loud would make his father believe him. Claire hurt Mommy. She hit her. She wouldn't stop. Kyle's mind reeled as he held Harrison tighter, his own heart threatening to explode from the terror of what he was seeing. He wanted to deny it outright, to tell Harrison he was confused, mistaken, overwhelmed by fear. But the evidence was undeniable: Smer's broken body, the witnesses whispering about a fight, the way Claire had disappeared without explanation. Every detail pointed to one conclusion, and Kyle felt it crush him from within. Could the woman he was about to marry really have done this? Was Claire's dark past, the shadows of Jordan's training, resurfacing with a vengeance? He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to call Claire and beg her to tell him it wasn't true. But when he looked at Harrison's trembling hands and heard the shallow gasps of Summer as she was lifted onto the stretcher, Kyle said nothing. Rage and despair knotted in his throat, but words refused to come. The ambulance doors slammed shut, and Kyle was left on the curb holding Harrison, his mind spinning with conflicting emotions. The father in him wanted to shield his son from every detail, to promise him that Summer would live and that no one would ever hurt her again. The man in him wanted to find Claire immediately, to drag her into the light and demand to know why. But the fiancé in him, man who had slipped a ring on her finger and promised her forever, was paralyzed. He could not confront her, not yet, because if it was true, if she had done this, then everything he believed about love, redemption, and second chances would collapse like glass beneath his feet. He couldn't face that truth, not yet. So silence became his prison. At the hospital, the news was grim. Summer was unconscious, bleeding heavily from a head wound. Doctors worked frantically, stitching and stabilizing, their expressions grave as they whispered to one another in clinical terms that only amplified Kyle's dread. Every second stretched into an eternity as he paced outside the emergency room, with Harrison clinging to his hand, the boy asking over and over again if his mommy would be okay. Kyle's reassurances grew hollow even to his own ears, but he repeated them because what else could he do? He could not tell Harrison the truth that he had no idea if Summer would wake, that Claire might have been the one to cause this, that their family had once again been torn apart by violence. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread through the corridors of the hospital and beyond. Word traveled quickly in circles where the Newmans and Abbotts reigned, and by the time Nick and Phyllis arrived, their fury had already reached a boiling point. They demanded answers, their voices sharp, their eyes filled with blame. How could Kyle not know what had happened? How could he allow Claire near Harrison if she was capable of this? Jack arrived soon after, torn between his role as a father trying to protect Kyle and his duty as a patriarch of the family dragged once again into scandal. Victor, when he heard the news, wasted no time in condemning Claire as a threat, making it clear that if she had harmed Summer, she would never set foot near Newman territory again. But in the midst of all the chaos, Claire herself was nowhere to be found. She had fled the scene, her mind reeling from the violence she had unleashed. The image of Summer crumpling to the floor, the sound of Harrison's cries, haunted her with every step. She hadn't wanted it to go that far. Summer had provoked her. Yes, but Claire had sworn to herself that she would never again become the weapon Jordan had forged her into. And yet, in that heated moment, instinct had taken over, and now her hands were stained with blood, figuratively if not literally. Alone in the night, Claire trembled with fear, shame, and the gnawing realization that her future with Kyle might already be over. Kyle, for his part, refused to condemn her outright, even as everyone around him demanded it. He couldn't bring himself to say the words. To admit that his fiancée had done this was to accept that he had been wrong about her all along, that his love had blinded him to a darkness he should have recognized. So he held his tongue, kept his fury locked behind clenched teeth, and let the storm swirl around him. Inside, however, the rage burned hotter with every passing moment. He wanted to believe Claire would never hurt Summer, but the evidence was undeniable. And yet, she was his bride-to-be, the woman he had chosen, and in the cruelest twist of fate, that choice now threatened to destroy every bond he held dear. As Summer fought for her life in the hospital, Claire wandered the streets of Nice, torn between surrender and escape. Jordan's voice echoed in her mind, mocking her, reminding her that she would never truly be free of what she had been trained to become. And back at the hospital, Kyle stood silently at Summer's bedside, Harrison asleep in his arms, his eyes fixed on the monitors keeping her alive. He did not know what the future held, but he knew one truth beyond doubt: nothing would ever be the same again.